Hello and welcome to Soulspeak. Tonight we're diving into a story that begins in a peaceful suburb, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. But behind the white fences and warm smiles, darkness was quietly waiting. When police entered the Harper home, they found a scene no one could forget: a mother lifeless, a child barely clinging to life, and no sign of forced entry. For 15 years, the question echoed through Austin, Texas: who killed Lena Harper? This isn't just a story about murder. It's about trust, betrayal, and how one strand of DNA can bring justice even after years of silence. The year was 1987. America was changing. Big hair, neon colors, rock ballads on the radio, but in a quiet suburb outside Austin, Texas, time seemed to move a little slower. The town of Maplewood wasn't on any tourist map. It was the kind of place that only locals could love: a handful of diners, a single traffic light, and a rhythm of life that rarely changed. Every morning the same school bus rattled down Willow Lane. Every evening, porch lights flickered on like clockwork, one after another, until the entire street glowed with a soft, comforting amber hue. And at the very end of that street stood the Harper home, a two-story house painted soft cream, with white shutters and a garden that always smelled faintly of jasmine. A wind chime hung by the porch, and when the Texas breeze swept through, it sang a song of peace. To anyone passing by, it was the picture of a happy family. Inside those walls lived Lena Harper, 28 years old, wife and mother of two. She wasn't famous, or rich, or known for anything in particular, but to those who knew her, Lena was unforgettable. She had this way of listening that made people feel seen, really seen, as if their words mattered. She carried herself with a kind of quiet grace, always smiling, always gentle. Before she married, Lena worked as a marketing assistant for a small agency in Austin. She had big dreams back then: city lights, creative projects, maybe even her own firm someday. But life has a way of rewriting our plans. After her daughter Emma was born, Lena began to see the world differently. The late nights, the deadlines, the constant rush, it all felt meaningless compared to the tiny heartbeats sleeping in her arms. When her second child arrived, she didn't think twice. She quit her job, turned in her office key, and came home. People called it a sacrifice. She called it love. Her husband, Ethan Harper, was proud of her decision, or at least, that's what he said. Ethan was 31, a man of few words but dependable hands. He worked at her father's print factory, where machines clattered and ink filled the air. He'd leave before sunrise and return long after dark, his clothes smelling of paper and grease. To him, that was love too: providing, building, doing. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. 2 kids, a home, a steady income. But behind closed doors, there was a silence that no one wanted to name. Lena's world had grown smaller, quieter. Her days blurred together: morning cereal, laundry cycles, playground visits, bedtime stories. Sometimes, he'd glance at the clock and realize an entire week had slipped through her fingers without anything truly happening. In those quiet hours after the children fell asleep, Lena would often sit by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights cast long, pale lines across the lawn. She'd listen to the distant hum of cars on the highway and wonder what her life might have been if she hadn't stopped chasing the things that once made her heart race. There was no bitterness in her, just a kind of longing, a soft ache that settled behind her ribs. Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't know what to do with it. He was tired more often now, distant, distracted. Sometimes, he'd come home late, smelling faintly of beer and smoke, claiming he'd stayed for a few drinks with friends after work. Lena never questioned it. She wanted to believe in the simplicity of their life, that love, like the house they built, would stand strong if she just kept it clean, kept it warm, kept it steady. But love doesn't crumble overnight. It erodes quietly, like water on stone. There were moments when Lena caught herself staring at the family photo on the mantel. Ethan, Emma, and baby Noah, all smiles, frozen in time. The picture looked like happiness, but sometimes it felt like a photograph of strangers. Still, she carried on, because that's what good wives did. They held things together. They didn't complain, and yet, even she could feel it, the small shifts in the air. The way her husband's touch grew colder, how he avoided eye contact when she asked about his day. The home that once felt like a sanctuary now felt fragile. Their neighbor, Tom Reeves, lived 2 houses down, a friendly man in his 30s who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning and always offered to help. He'd bring over tools when Ethan was away, fix a light bulb, check the gutters. Lena appreciated the kindness, though sometimes she caught something strange in his smile, too lingering, too familiar. She brushed it off. This was Maplewood, after all. People were just kind here. Most nights, after the children were asleep, she'd walk through the house, turning off the lights one by one. The kitchen, the hallway, the living room. She'd stop for a moment at the nursery door, watching her kids breathe softly in their sleep, then close it gently. The house would fall silent, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lena would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the plaster with her eyes. The air always felt colder on those nights, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps in the yard, a creak on the porch, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. But when she looked, there was nothing there, just the Texas wind whispering through the trees. Still, a feeling lingered, a kind of quiet unease that made her double-check the locks, close the curtains a little tighter, and hold her children a little longer the next morning. No one knew it then, not Ethan, not Tom, not even Lena herself, but the walls of that little house were already beginning to remember things they were never meant to witness. And in just a few days' time, on a bright March afternoon, the peace of Willow Lane would be shattered forever. Hello and welcome to Soulspeak. Tonight we're diving into a story that begins in a peaceful suburb, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. But behind the white fences and warm smiles, darkness was quietly waiting. When police entered the Harper home, they found a scene no one could forget: a mother lifeless, a child barely clinging to life, and no sign of forced entry. For 15 years, the question echoed through Austin, Texas: who killed Lena Harper? This isn't just a story about murder, it's about trust, betrayal, and how one strand of DNA can bring justice even after years of silence. The year was 1987. America was changing. Big hair, neon colors, rock ballads on the radio. But in a quiet suburb outside Austin, Texas, time seemed to move a little slower. The town of Maplewood wasn't on any tourist map. It was the kind of place that only locals could love: a handful of diners, a single traffic light, and a rhythm of life that rarely changed. Every morning, the same school bus rattled down Willow Lane. Every evening, porch lights flickered on like clockwork, one after another, until the entire street glowed with a soft, comforting amber hue. And at the very end of that street stood the Harper home, a two-story house painted soft cream, with white shutters and a garden that always smelled faintly of jasmine. A wind chime hung by the porch, and when the Texas breeze swept through, it sang a song of peace. To anyone passing by, it was the picture of a happy family. Inside those walls lived Lena Harper, 28 years old, wife and mother of 2. She wasn't famous, or rich, or known for anything in particular, but to those who knew her, Lena was unforgettable. She had this way of listening that made people feel seen, really seen, as if their words mattered. She carried herself with a kind of quiet grace, always smiling, always gentle. Before she married, Lena worked as a marketing assistant for a small agency in Austin. She had big dreams back then: city lights, creative projects, maybe even her own firm someday. But life has a way of rewriting our plans. After her daughter Emma was born, Lena began to see the world differently. The late nights, the deadlines, the constant rush, it all felt meaningless compared to the tiny heartbeat sleeping in her arms. When her second child arrived, she didn't think twice. She quit her job, turned in her office key, and came home. People called it a sacrifice. She called it love. Her husband, Ethan Harper, was proud of her decision, or at least, that's what he said. Ethan was 31, a man of few words, but dependable hands. He worked at her father's print factory, where machines clattered and ink filled the air. He'd leave before sunrise and return long after dark, his clothes smelling of paper and grease. To him that was love too: providing, building, doing. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. 2 kids, a home, a steady income, but behind closed doors, there was a silence that no one wanted to name. Lena's world had grown smaller, quieter. Her days blurred together: morning cereal, laundry cycles, playground visits, bedtime stories. Sometimes he'd glance at the clock and realize an entire week had slipped through her fingers without anything truly happening. In those quiet hours after the children fell asleep, Lena would often sit by the kitchen window, watching the streetlights cast long, pale lines across the lawn. She'd listen to the distant hum of cars on the highway and wonder what her life might have been if she hadn't stopped chasing the things that once made her heart race. There was no bitterness in her, just a kind of longing, a soft ache that settled behind her ribs. Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't know what to do with it. He was tired more often now, distant, distracted. Sometimes, he'd come home late, smelling faintly of beer and smoke, claiming he'd stayed for a few drinks with friends after work. Lena never questioned it. She wanted to believe in the simplicity of their life, that love, like the house they built, would stand strong if she just kept it clean, kept it warm, kept it steady. But love doesn't crumble overnight. It erodes quietly, like water on stone. There were moments when Lena caught herself staring at the family photo on the mantel. Her, Ethan, Emma, and baby Noah, all smiles, frozen in time. The picture looked like happiness, but sometimes it felt like a photograph of strangers. Still, she carried on. Because that's what good wives did. They held things together. They didn't complain. And yet, even she could feel it. The small shifts in the air. The way her husband's touch grew colder. How he avoided eye contact when she asked about his day. The home that once felt like a sanctuary now felt fragile. Their neighbor, Tom Reeves, lived 2 houses down, a friendly man in his 30s who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning and always offered to help. He'd bring over tools when Ethan was away, fix a light bulb, check the gutters. Lena appreciated the kindness, though sometimes she caught something strange in his smile, too lingering, too familiar. She brushed it off. This was Maplewood after all. People were just kind here most nights. After the children were asleep, she'd walk through the house, turning off the lights one by one, the kitchen, the hallway, the living room. She'd stop for a moment at the nursery door, watching her kids breathe softly in their sleep, then close it gently. The house would fall silent, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lena would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the plaster with her eyes. The air always felt colder on those nights, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps in the yard, a creak on the porch, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. But when she looked, there was nothing there, just the Texas wind whispering through the trees still. A feeling lingered, a kind of quiet unease that made her double-check the locks, close the curtains a little tighter, and hold her children a little longer the next morning. No one knew it then. Not Ethan, not Tom, not even Lena herself, but the walls of that little house were already beginning to remember things they were never meant to witness. And in just a few days' time, on a bright March afternoon, the peace of Willow Lane would be shattered forever. The night air was heavy with silence as Ethan Harper turned onto Willow Lane. His headlights cut through the darkness, revealing the familiar houses, their porches lit, flags still, curtains drawn tight for the night. He knew every mailbox, every crack in the pavement. He had driven this road 1,000 times before, but tonight it felt different. The street seemed longer, the silence heavier. At the very end stood his home, the cream-colored house with the jasmine bushes and the porch swing that always creaked in the wind. But now, that swing moved without wind, and the front door was open. Ethan's heart dropped. Tom Reeves' pickup truck was parked crookedly in the driveway, its headlights spilling across the yard. One of the doors was still open. Ethan barely stopped his own car before jumping out, gravel crunching under his boots. "Tom," he shouted, voice sharp, desperate. "Tom, where's my wife?" Tom appeared near the porch, his face ghostly under the light. His hands were shaking, his shirt damp with sweat. For a second, he looked like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. "Ethan," he finally whispered, "don't go inside. Just wait for the police." But Ethan was already moving. He shoved past him, his shoes hitting the porch steps with a thud. The door creaked as he pushed it open slowly, almost unwillingly, revealing a hallway dimly lit by the glow of the television. The sound of canned laughter drifted from the living room, an old sitcom playing, bright and cheerful, echoing through the dark house like a ghost. Something about that sound made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up. "Lena," he called, his voice trembling. "Honey." No answer. He stepped further inside. The living room was a mess. Toys scattered across the floor, a glass of water tipped over on the coffee table. The curtains swayed slightly, as if someone had just passed by. Then he saw her, a small, limp body on the couch, his daughter Emma, her tiny hand hung over the edge. Pale and still. "Oh God," Ethan rushed forward, dropping to his knees. Emma, sweetheart. Her skin was cold to the touch, her face streaked with tears. But when he pressed his ear close, he heard it, a faint breath. She was alive. Barely. Behind him, Tom's voice shook as he fumbled for the phone. I'm calling the cops. Don't move her. Ethan, just stay with her." Ethan didn't respond. His mind was blank, his body trembling. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. From somewhere upstairs, a faint sound broke through the silence, a baby crying. A low, frightened wail. "Noah," Ethan whispered, stumbling toward the staircase. But Tom grabbed his arm. "Wait, let them handle it. Please, man, just wait." Then came the sirens. faint at first, then rising red and blue lights reflecting off the windows, slicing through the darkness. The sound grew louder, closer, until the entire neighborhood seemed to wake from its sleep. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering. Dogs barked. Somewhere down the street, someone prayed. Within minutes, Maplewood police swarmed the yard. Officers moved with practiced urgency, shouting orders, setting up tape. Paramedics rushed inside, checking Emma's pulse, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Ethan followed, dazed, his hands streaked with blood he hadn't realized was there. Detective Nora Blake arrived shortly after, a seasoned investigator in her 30s, Sharped.com, but the look in her eyes said she'd seen this too many times. The Harper house was small, yet it felt endless. The deeper she went, the quieter it became, that kind of silence that presses against your skin. The faint sound of the television still played behind her, its laughter hollow and cruel. She opened the first door to the left, the nursery. A crib, overturned toys, the faint smell of baby powder. A small boy sat inside the crib, crying, reaching up toward her. Nora lifted him gently, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." She handed him to a paramedic, then moved toward the master bedroom. The door was half closed. Something inside glowed faintly. Nora pushed the door open with the edge of her flashlight. That's when she saw it. Lena Harper lay motionless on the bed. Her wrists were bound with a string of Christmas lights, still plugged in, their bulbs flickering weakly in a soft orange-red glow. The cord dug deep into her skin, marking her flesh. Her face was turned slightly to the side, eyes closed, lips parted as if frozen mid-breath. Blood stained the sheets. The lamp on the nightstand had fallen and shattered. A picture frame lay broken on the floor, a family photo of Lena, Ethan, and their 2 children. The glass was cracked straight across her face. Nora stood still, the light in her hand trembling. She had seen violence before, but not like this. Not in a home that smelled of children's shampoo and Sunday dinners. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the younger officers behind her. Nora took a slow breath, her voice low and steady. "Get the kids out. Call the coroner. No one touches anything." The faint hum of the Christmas lights filled the silence. Their soft glow painted the room in shades of sorrow, festive lights meant for joy, now illuminating horror. When Nora stepped back into the hallway, she passed Ethan standing near the front door, surrounded by officers. He looked empty, like a man whose soul had been pulled from him. His lips moved soundlessly, trying to form her name. "She's gone," an officer said quietly. Ethan didn't react. He just stared past them, at the staircase, at the shadows flickering across the wall. Outside, neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering behind trembling hands. The police lights turned the street into a scene from another world. Blue, red flashing across the faces of people who could no longer pretend that Maplewood was safe. When the paramedics carried Lena's body out under a white sheet, the night wind caught the edge of the fabric and lifted it just slightly, like a breath. Ethan sank to his knees. He didn't cry, not yet, not then. He just stared at the porch swing moving gently in the wind. The same swing he'd built for her on their first anniversary, creaking softly, endlessly, as if the house itself was mourning. The TV inside still played, its laugh track echoing faintly into the night. And for the first time in the history of Willow Lane, no one was laughing. The dawn that followed was heavy, not golden. It bled slowly across the rooftops of Willow Lane, touching the police tape that fluttered outside the Harper home, a house that had once symbolized warmth, now standing like a silent witness. The early morning chill clung to everything. Reporters were gathering at the far end of the street, their voices low, their cameras restless. Neighbors stood on their porches in robes and slippers, arms folded tight across their chests. They whispered the same question over and over. How could this happen here? Detective Nora Blake had been awake since before sunrise. She'd spent most of the night inside the Harper home, overseeing the forensics team. But the longer she stayed, the more something about the scene gnawed at her. The door wasn't broken. The windows were locked from the inside. No shattered glass, no forced entry, no sign of struggle near the front. Whoever had entered that house hadn't fought their way in. They'd been invited. The living room was still under investigation, every inch photographed, every stain catalogued. The smell of latex gloves and fingerprint powder hung thick in the air. The sofa cushions were upturned, the floor dusted with fine black residue. On the dining table, 2 plates sat side by side, dinner half finished. 1 fork lying on the floor, chicken and potatoes. One of the techs murmured, noting it down. Nora leaned closer. "So," she was interrupted mid-meal, "looks that way." She probably knew whoever came in, maybe offered them food or drink. Nora's eyes drifted to the corner of the room. A child's toy, a stuffed rabbit, lay on its side, one ear torn. The small details always hit her the hardest. She took a slow breath and stepped into the hallway. The lights flickered. The smell of blood still lingered faintly beneath the sterile chemicals. In the narrow hall that led to the master bedroom, she paused. A faint smudge of a shoe print on the floorboards, adult male, size unknown. Not Ethan's work boots. Different soul. Get a cast of this, she said quietly. Outside, Ethan Harper sat hunched on the back bumper of an ambulance, a thin blanket draped around his shoulders. His eyes were empty, the kind of emptiness that comes not from tears, but from something deeper, a soul turned to ash. A detective named Riley crouched beside him, asking quiet questions, taking notes. Nora approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "can I talk to you for a moment?" He nodded weakly. His hands were trembling. There was a streak of something reddish on his sleeve. "We just need to clarify a few things. Can you tell me again where you were yesterday evening?" Ethan's voice came out flat, mechanical. "At work until 5. Then Murphy's bar, with the guys. I had a buyer too, maybe. I left around 7:30. Tried calling Lena from the gas station. No one answered. I called Tom." "What time did you get home?" "Around 8:30, Nora nodded. "And the stain on your sleeve?" Ethan blinked, confused, looking down at it for the first time. "Oh, that's paint. Red ink? Maybe. We've been repainting the press rollers at work. It's not blood." Nora didn't respond. She simply noted it down. "We'll need to test it, just to be sure." Ethan didn't protest. He just stared blankly at the road. "Do whatever you need," he said quietly. Across the yard, Tom Reeves stood near his pickup truck, arms folded tightly. The sleeves of his plaid shirt were rolled up, revealing hands smeared with faint grease. His jaw flexed as officers moved around his vehicle. He'd been cooperative, maybe too cooperative, talking fast, voice shaky. He'd told the same story 3 times. Ethan had called, he'd gone to check, found the door open, found Emma unconscious, called the police. But as Nora watched him, something felt off, not guilt, exactly, but fear. "Mr. Reeves," she said, approaching, "you've been very helpful. I just need to ask, when you went inside, did you touch anything?" No, Mom. I swear I saw Emma on the couch. I didn't even step all the way in." "Did you see anyone else? Any cars nearby?" He shook his head. "No one. It was quiet." Too quiet, one of the forensic techs interrupted, a young man holding up a small evidence bag. Inside was a rag, dark-stained. "Detective, we found this under the front seat of his truck." "What's that?" Nora asked. "Looks like blood." Tom's face drained of color. "What? That's not blood. That's oil. I was working on the mower last week, spilled transmission fluid all over the place." "We'll have it tested," Nora replied, her voice calm but unreadable. "You think I did this?" He snapped suddenly, his voice breaking. "You think I hurt them? Jesus Christ, Lena was my friend." Nora held up a hand. "No one's accusing you, Mr. Reeves, but you were there first. We have to rule everyone out." Tom exhaled shakily, rubbing his forehead. "You don't understand. That family, they were like my own." Nora looked at him for a long moment, really looked. There was pain in his eyes, but there was also something else, something like shame. Back inside, the forensic team worked through the day. They dusted every surface, collected every fiber, catalogued every trace. But the more evidence they found, the less sense it all made. There was no forced entry, no stolen valuables, no fingerprints other than the family's and Tom's. The killer hadn't come for money. He'd come for Lena. By afternoon, the scene was stripped bare. The laughter that once filled the Harper home was replaced by the steady buzz of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic click of cameras, and the low murmur of detectives trying to make sense of a puzzle that refused to fit. Nora stood in the bedroom doorway one last time before leaving. The Christmas lights still hung loosely over the bed, unplugged now, lifeless. Their colors, red, gold, green, had once been cheerful. Now they looked grotesque. She took one deep breath and whispered to herself, "No forced entry means trust. Trust means connection. Start with the ones closest." That evening, back at the Maplewood Police Department, Nora spread the evidence photos across her desk. Lena Harper's driver's license photo sat in the center, young, bright-eyed, hopeful. Around it, photos of Ethan, Tom, and a few family members filled the board. A headline from the morning paper lay nearby. "Mother of 2 found dead in home. Police suspect foul play." The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air. Nora pinched the bridge of her nose and sighed. There were too many maybes, too many holes. She stared at Ethan's photo, at Tom's, then back at Lena's. Someone in this picture was lying. She leaned forward, pen scratching softly as she wrote across her notepad, no break-in, victim bound with personal item Christmas lights, dinner unfinished, new attacker, red substance on husband's shirt pending test, oil or blood in neighbor's truck pending test. Then she underlined one final word, motive, because that was the one thing missing. No robbery, no enemies, no clear reason, and yet someone had looked Lena Harper in the eyes. Someone she trusted, and decided to end her life. As the station clock struck midnight, Nora stood by the window looking out at the dark Texas sky. The town was quiet again, too quiet, as if trying to forget. But Nora couldn't forget. The faint image of the Harper house still burned behind her eyelids. The laughter of that sitcom still echoed in her memory, haunting her. She whispered softly, almost like a promise, "We'll find you, Lena, I swear to God. We'll find who did this." And somewhere in the evidence room, sealed in a plastic bag, the Christmas lights sat coiled and still, waiting for the day they would speak. Days turned into weeks, but the Maplewood Police Department was no closer to finding who had killed Lena Harper. The neighborhood had gone quiet again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that carries fear, the kind that makes people check their locks twice and turn off the lights earlier than usual. For Detective Nora Blake, the case had started to feel like quicksand. Every time she thought she found something solid, it slipped away beneath her. No forced entry, no missing valuables, no witnesses. But then, a small detail began to surface. One name that kept showing up in whispers and half-finished sentences. Jacob Grant. Jacob was Lena's brother-in-law, Ethan's younger half-brother, 29, restless, and always in trouble. He drifted from job to job, apartment to apartment, never staying anywhere long enough to build a life. Jacob was the kind of man people described with a sigh. He means well, but there was always a but. He'd been arrested twice, once for shoplifting, once for a bar fight that sent another man to the hospital. Nothing major, but enough to make his name stand out in a background check. He also had a known history of substance abuse, painkillers, then meth. When Nora first read his file, her pen paused mid-sentence. A man with a temper, a history of drugs, and someone the family knew. She drove to his last known address, a one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop on the edge of town. The place smelled like stale beer and old smoke. The blinds were half closed, the carpet stained. Jacob opened the door wearing jeans and no shirt, a tattoo snaking across his collarbone. His hair, sun-bleached blonde, caught the morning light. "Detective Blake," she introduced herself calmly. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about your sister-in-law, Lena Harper." Jacob froze, his eyes flicking away. "I heard what happened." "Terrible thing you heard," she repeated. "From who?" "Ethan called me, said someone broke in." "There was no break-in," Nora said softly. That caught his attention. He looked at her then, really looked, his pupils sharp, alert. "So you think someone she knew did it?" "That's what I'm trying to find out," Nora replied. "When was the last time you saw Lena?" He scratched his arm, eyes shifting. "Few days before it happened. I stopped by to see Ethan. He wasn't home. Lena let me in, gave me some coffee. That's all." Nora studied him, the way he couldn't meet her gaze for more than a second, the way his foot tapped against the floor. "Did you argue?" "What? No. Why would we?" "Because according to one of her friends," she said, flipping through her notebook, "you made her uncomfortable. You touched her once, said something that crossed the line." For a moment the room was completely still. Then Jacob laughed, short, hollow, defensive. "Oh, come on. You're really gonna listen to gossip? I was joking around." She knew that. Lena wasn't some saint, you know. Nora didn't flinch. "Do you mind if I ask where you were the night of March 3rd? At home, watching TV, alone? Anyone who can confirm that?" "No." "Guess that makes me the perfect villain, huh?" he said, smirking bitterly. Later that afternoon, the forensics lab called Nora. They'd completed the secondary sweep of the Harper home, focusing on fibers and trace evidence. And there it was, a single blonde hair, found near the edge of the bed, tangled in the Christmas lights that had bound Lena's wrists. DNA results confirmed the match. Jacob Grant. When Nora received the report, she stared at the page for a long time. One hair, one fragile thread connecting him to the crime scene. She called him back in for questioning. "You said you hadn't been in the house recently," she reminded him. "I said I stopped by a few days before. Maybe a week, then you'd expect your DNA to be everywhere," Nora said. "But it's not. We found one strand of your hair, only one, near her wrists." Jacob's smirk faded. His jaw clenched. You think that proves something? It proves you were close enough to touch her, Nora said quietly. He leaned back in the chair, arms folded. You're twisting this. I used to visit all the time, help with the kids, fix stuff. You really think a hair means I killed her? It means you were there, she replied. And you lied about when. Jacob's voice rose. You're out of your mind. I didn't hurt her. I cared about Lena. She was family. He looked away, eyes glistening whether from anger or guilt, Nora couldn't tell. Meanwhile, Emma Harper, the surviving daughter, had finally regained consciousness at the hospital. The doctors said she'd been dehydrated and in shock, but she was awake. Nora went to see her, sitting quietly by her bedside. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit, the same one from the living room, and stared blankly at the wall. Nora spoke softly, like she might to her own child. Hi, sweetheart. My name's Nora. I'm helping the police. Do you remember what happened that night? Emma didn't speak at first. Then, slowly, she nodded. There was a noise. She whispered, Mummy told me to stay on the couch. Did you see who came in? Her voice trembled. A man. Can you tell me what he looked like? Emma's little hands tightened around the rabbit. He had light hair, like the sun, and he talked to Mummy then. She screamed. Nora's breath caught. You did so good, sweetheart. You're very brave. She left the hospital room with her hands shaking. There it was, confirmation. Simple but devastating. A man with light hair. Jacob Grant. That night, Nora sat alone in her office, the lamp casting long shadows across the caseboard. She pinned Jacob's photo beside Lena's. Then she drew a red string between them. But her gut wasn't ready to close the case. There was still something missing, something that didn't fit. Jacob was volatile, yes, angry, but his fear felt real. His denial too controlled to be pure panic. And yet, the evidence didn't lie. The child's words didn't lie. As she stared at Lena's smiling photo on the board, the question burned deeper than ever. If Jacob didn't do it, then who else had she trusted enough to let in? The lights in the station flickered. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the whole town was washing itself clean. But in Maplewood, not everything could be washed away. Some stains, like the truth, were meant to surface slowly. The Harper case went cold faster than anyone expected. 4 months after Lena's death, Detective Nora Blake pushed every angle. She re-interviewed witnesses, searched for the missing weapon, revisited the autopsy report again and again until the pages started to crease beneath her fingertips, but the evidence refused to cooperate. The Christmas lights yielded no usable prints. The house showed no signs of forced entry. And that single blonde hair, the one that had briefly pointed to Jacob Grant, wasn't enough to convict anyone. The district attorney refused to take the case to trial. Too circumstantial, he said. A good lawyer will tear it apart. And so, just like that, Lena Harper's murder slipped quietly into the back of a file cabinet. Another unsolved name on a long list of tragedies that time would try to erase. The years that followed were strange in Maplewood. For a while, people locked their doors, drew their curtains tighter, watched strangers more closely. But life, as it always does, crept back in. Kids grew up. Houses were repainted. The story of the Harper house became something whispered only at backyard gatherings. Do you remember that poor woman? The one with the Christmas lights? By the mid-90s, most of the neighbors had moved away. Only the old oak trees and the cracked sidewalk remembered. For Ethan Harper, time didn't heal anything. It just stretched the pain thinner long enough for him to live with, never long enough for him to escape. He sold the house a year after the murder. He said he couldn't bear to walk through those rooms anymore, couldn't stand the smell of the jasmine garden, or the sound of the porch swing creaking when the wind blew. He moved into a small apartment near downtown Austin, took a job repairing copy machines, and tried to rebuild his life piece by piece. But people could see it in his eyes, the hollow look of a man who was breathing out of habit, not purpose. He visited Emma and Noah often. The children went to live with Lena's parents after the investigation stalled. He never talked about that night. Not once. Then, one rainy evening in 1995, Ethan Harper's truck skidded on a wet highway curve outside of Bastrop County. He was killed instantly. The coroner called it an accident. Some said it looked like he'd stopped trying to correct the wheel when Detective Nora Blake got the call. She sat at her desk in silence for a long time, staring at the case file that still bore his wife's name. She whispered softly, "Now both of them are gone." Time passed. Officers retired. New ones took their place. The Harper file gathered dust on a shelf marked Cold Cases, 1980 to 1989. And then, in the fall of 2001, everything changed. Nora had been promoted to lead investigator in the cold case division. a program newly formed to revisit unsolved crimes with modern technology. When she was given her first batch of files to review, one name on the list stopped her cold. Lena Harper. The same handwriting, the same faded photographs, the same Christmas lights sealed inside an evidence bag. 15 years later, the memory of that house still burned in her mind. The TV's laughter, the porch swing, the little girl's pale hand. She ran her thumb along the edge of the folder, almost afraid to open it, but then she did. Inside were the same unanswered questions, no forced entry, no weapon, no confession. But now, she had something the 1987 team didn't have: DNA technology. She stared at the evidence list again, and at the single line that stood out like a whisper from the past. Item 14, string of decorative lights, recovered from wrists of victim. That night, alone in the office, Nora picked up the phone and called the state crime lab. "This is Detective Nora Blake, Cold Case Division. I need a DNA rescreen on a case from 87, priority code, Harper." The technician on the other end hesitated. "Ma'am, that case is 15 years old." "I know," Nora said quietly, "but it's time." She looked again at Lena's photograph, smiling, full of life, eyes that once believed in safety and love. She waited long enough. Outside, the night was still. The city hummed with the sound of distant traffic and the promise of change. Nora closed the file gently and turned off the light. The office went dark, but one thing remained clear in her mind. This case wasn't over. Not yet. Some truths just take longer to find their way to the surface. And for Lena Harper, that time was finally coming. Asterisk. It was 2002, and technology had finally caught up with the ghosts. Across the country, police departments were reopening old files, murders that had gone cold decades before, giving the dead one last chance to speak through the fragments they'd left behind. In Austin, Detective Nora Blake sat in the sterile light of the crime lab, the hum of machinery around her blending with the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. In front of her was a small, sealed bag, evidence item number 14, recovered from the Harper home 15 years ago. A strand of Christmas lights, tangled, fragile, and still faintly shimmering with the faintest trace of what had once been joy. She remembered the night. She found them, the flicker of orange bulbs against the pale of Lena's skin, the way the wires bit into her wrists. For years, those lights had been nothing more than a symbol of brutality and unanswered questions. But now, with DNA profiling finally precise enough to detect the smallest trace of human contact, they might become something else. Proof. The results came in on a Tuesday morning. The lab tech, a young man barely old enough to remember the 80s, handed her the report with quiet hands. "Detective Blake, we've got a match." She unfolded the paper slowly. DNA profile consistent with Jacob Grant, 100% probability. The words blurred for a moment as she exhaled. 15 years of frustration, anger, and quiet promises catching in her throat. Finally, after all this time, the silence had broken. Jacob Grant was living 2 counties away now, in a rented trailer at the edge of a construction site. Life had not been kind to him. His hair had thinned and gone dull, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed by years of bad choices and cheap whiskey. When the officers approached, he didn't fight. He simply muttered, "What's this about?" But when he heard her name, Lena Harper, something flickered across his face. A twitch, a memory, a flash of guilt, or maybe fear. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "You can't still be chasing that." "We never stopped," one of the officers replied. In the interrogation room, Nora sat across from him once again. 15 years had changed them both. Her hair streaked with gray now, his hands trembling slightly as he rubbed at the back of his neck. The air between them was thick with history. She placed the DNA report on the table and slid it toward him. "We tested the Christmas lights," she said softly. "Your DNA is all over them." Jacob looked at the paper but didn't touch it. "That doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," Nora replied. "Those lights were around Lena's wrists when we found her." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe it got there from before. I told you I used to visit all the time, help around the house, stuff like that." "And yet," Nora said, her tone sharp but controlled, "we didn't find your DNA anywhere else. Not on the kitchen glasses, not on the door, only there on the lights, near the blood, near her." Jacob's eyes darted to the side. He swallowed. "You're twisting it. You don't know what happened. Then tell me." A long silence stretched between them. The hum of the overhead light filled the room like a pulse. Finally, he leaned back, sighing through his teeth. "Lena and we were close. You ever think about that? Maybe that's why my DNA is there. Maybe we were involved." Nora's eyes didn't waver. You're saying you had a relationship with your brother's wife. He smirked weakly. Yeah, maybe she didn't tell him. Maybe she didn't tell anyone. Or maybe you're trying to rewrite what happened now that you've been caught, Nora said coldly. Because DNA doesn't lie, Jacob. But you do. The words seemed to sink into him like stones. He stared at the table, his jaw tightening. His voice dropped low. She kept telling me I needed to get clean, that I was ruining my life. She looked at me like I was trash. And that night, Nora pressed gently. He looked up, eyes glassy. I just wanted to talk to her. I swear to God I didn't plan anything. She told me Ethan was out. I asked if I could come in. She said no. She said I wasn't welcome there anymore. He rubbed his hands over his face, shaking. I pushed the door. She screamed. I tried to make her stop. I grabbed the lights, they were on the table from the kids' room. She fought back. I didn't mean to hurt her. But you did, Nora said. I didn't mean to kill her, he whispered. It happened. And when I saw what I'd done, she wasn't moving. I panicked. I left. I never went back. For a moment, the room was silent except for the quiet sound of his breathing. Then Nora stood. You didn't just take her life, she said. You destroyed a family, her children, her husband. You took everything. Jacob didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the table, the same small crack in the metal surface he'd stared at 15 years earlier when the interrogation ended. Nora stepped out into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered above her, humming softly, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to exhale. The Harper case, the case that had haunted her career, was finally closed. It wasn't triumph, she felt. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter, the ache that comes from finally knowing the truth, even when it hurts to hear it. Jacob Grant was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to 45 years in prison. He never appealed, never asked for forgiveness. 4 years later, he died behind bars, liver cancer. The final echo of a life spent running from the truth. For Detective Nora Blake, justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace, the slow kind. The kind that arrives only when you've spent years carrying someone else's pain. She kept a photo of Lena Harper pinned to the board in her office until the day she retired. And every time she looked at it, she thought of the words Lena's daughter, Emma, once said, small and fragile. Lying in that hospital bed so many years ago, he had light hair, like the sun. Now at last, the sun had set on him. Asterisk sometimes. The truth hides in silence, waiting for one small clue to speak again. 15 years may seem like forever, but justice never truly sleeps. DNA doesn't lie, and neither do the memories it carries. What do you think about Lena's story? Do you believe every secret eventually comes to light? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Press like if you believe in truth over time. And subscribe so you won't miss the next story where science gives justice a voice.